I asked for a title change. My boss said, "Titles are for leaders, you're just a coder." I quit on the spot. He didn't know I wrote the encryption key for the entire database. When the system locked him out 48 hours later, he offered me triple pay to come back. I said no. Sup Reddit. My boss told me titles are for leaders, and I'm just a coder. 48 hours later, his entire system locked him out, and he was begging me to come back for triple my salary. Some lessons cost more than others. Buckle up because this one gets good. I, 32 male, spent 4 years at a mid-sized financial services company called Kellerman and Associates. Not a bank exactly, more like a firm that handled wealth management, retirement accounts, and investment portfolios for high net worth clients. The kind of place where one security breach could end careers and sink the company overnight. We're talking social security numbers, bank routing information, investment strategies, personal identification data for over 12,000 clients. Sensitive stuff. When I started there, the security infrastructure was a complete disaster. I'm talking passwords stored in plain text files on a shared drive anyone could access. Encryption protocols that hadn't been updated since 2015. A database architecture held together with duct tape, hope, and whatever prayers the previous IT guy had whispered before he quit 6 months before I showed up. Nobody had touched the back-end systems since he left. Management didn't understand technology and didn't want to understand it. They just wanted things to work when they clicked buttons. My official title was Systems Developer. Entry-level classification according to their HR department, even though the actual job required senior-level expertise in about 6 different specializations. I was hired to maintain existing code and handle basic troubleshooting. What I actually did over the next 4 years was rebuild their entire security infrastructure from the ground up while they paid me like I was restocking printer paper and showing people how to reset their email passwords. First week on the job, I ran a basic security audit just to understand what I was working with. Found 17 critical vulnerabilities in the client database alone. 17. Any halfway decent hacker could have walked through the front door of their systems, taken everything, and probably left a thank you note on the way out. I documented all of it in a detailed report with severity ratings, potential consequences, and recommended fixes. Presented it to my direct supervisor, the director of operations, a guy named Gerald Whitman. Gerald was mid-50s with silver hair and expensive suits that probably cost more than my monthly rent. Zero technical knowledge. Thought the cloud was something you saw when you looked up at the sky. He flipped through my report with this expression, like I'd handed him a document written in ancient Sumerian. "Is this really that serious?" he asked. "We've never had any problems before." I spent 20 minutes explaining how one successful breach could result in federal investigations, regulatory fines potentially in the millions, class action lawsuits from affected clients, and the complete destruction of the company's reputation built over 40 years. Financial services lives and dies on trust. Lose that trust, and you lose everything. Gerald nodded along without understanding a single word. His eyes glazed over around minute 8. "Fine," he said finally. "Fix whatever needs fixing. But don't let it interfere with your regular duties." Regular duties meaning answering help desk tickets about forgotten passwords, slow computers, and why Excel was crashing. Real technical challenges, very stimulating work. I started working 12-hour days, came in early, stayed late, spent weekends researching best practices and testing solutions in sandbox environments I built on my own time. Rebuilt the authentication system completely, threw out the plain text password storage, and implemented proper hashing with salted encryption. Set up multi-factor authentication for anyone accessing sensitive data. Created audit trails so every access attempt was logged and traceable. Then I tackled the database encryption. This is where things got interesting. The existing encryption was a joke. Standard library implementation that anyone with a computer science degree could crack in an afternoon. For a financial services firm handling this much sensitive data, we needed something bulletproof, something custom, something that would make federal regulators nod approvingly instead of reaching for their citation pads. I spent 8 months designing and building a proprietary encryption framework from scratch. Not because I wanted to show off, but because the off-the-shelf solutions weren't adequate for their specific needs. The regulatory requirements, the data structure, the access patterns, everything pointed toward a custom solution. The core innovation was a rotating key architecture. Every 48 hours, the system automatically generated new encryption keys based on a mathematical algorithm I'd developed specifically for this application. The old keys would expire and the new ones would take over. Seamless transition. Zero downtime. Maximum security. Even if someone somehow obtained the current encryption keys, they'd be useless within 2 days. The rotating system meant any breach had a built-in expiration date. But here's the thing about custom encryption systems that management never understood. They require ongoing maintenance from someone who actually understands how they work. The key rotation algorithm wasn't code I'd copied from Stack Overflow or modified from some open source project. It was built on mathematical principles I'd developed through months of research and testing. Without understanding those principles, you couldn't modify the system, extend the key rotation period, or recover from a lockout scenario if something went wrong. I documented everything meticulously, stored the technical specifications in a secure location that only I had access to, made sure the system ran perfectly for 3 years without a single incident, a single breach, a single compliance failure. The company went from being a security nightmare that made auditors reach for antacids to passing every federal inspection with flying colors. Regulators who used to schedule follow-up visits started sending routine approval letters instead. Client confidence increased. New business rolled in. The company's reputation in the wealth management space improved noticeably, all because of infrastructure work that happened invisibly in the background, while everyone else attended meetings and sent emails. Gerald took credit for all of it during executive presentation, called it his Operational Excellence Initiative, talked about his strategic vision for technology modernization. My name never came up once. Not in presentations, not in company newsletters, not in the annual report that mentioned the improved security posture. The work existed. The person who did it apparently didn't. End of my first year, I scheduled a meeting with Gerald to discuss compensation and title adjustment. Systems developer didn't reflect what I actually did. I was functioning as their entire security department, database administrator, network architect, and infrastructure specialist rolled into one person. I wanted senior security engineer at minimum, something that matched the reality of my responsibilities. Gerald leaned back in his leather chair and gave me what I came to recognize as his concerned mentor expression, the one he used when he was about to say no, while pretending he was on your side. I appreciate your dedication, he said. Really, I do. But title changes require executive approval, and there's a process. Let me look into it and see what's possible. Months passed. Nothing happened. I asked again during my annual review in December. Gerald said budgets were tight after the holiday season, and we should revisit in Q2. I documented the conversation in an email summary sent to him and HR professional. Factual. Creating a paper trail without being obvious about it. Q2 came and went. No revisit. Second year, I expanded the security framework to include real-time threat monitoring. Built alert systems that notified me immediately if anyone attempted unauthorized access. Caught 3 separate phishing attempts targeting executive assistants who had access to client files. Stopped all 3 before any damage occurred. Wrote detailed incident reports. Suggested employee training protocols. Gerald forwarded my reports to the executive team with his name at the top. I asked for a raise and title change again. Came prepared this time with market research. Average salary for someone with my responsibilities and experience was almost double what Kellerman was paying me. Title wasn't just about ego or vanity. It affected future job prospects, industry recognition, and internal credibility when I needed other departments to take security recommendations seriously. Gerald nodded thoughtfully and said he completely understood my concerns. Said he'd advocate for me personally with the Executive Compensation Committee. Shook my hand and told me these things just take time in established organizations. Nothing happened. Again. Meanwhile, the company hired 2 new project managers at salaries higher than mine. Their job was to organize meetings about upcoming projects and send calendar invites for the meetings they'd organized. Very strategic work. They had impressive titles: Senior Project Lead, Strategic Implementation Coordinator. Neither one could explain what a database was if you gave them a dictionary and 3 hours. Third year, I stopped asking politely and started putting things in writing. Formal requests through HR channels. Documented evidence of market rate disparities. Comparisons to similar roles at competitor firms. Everything professional and factual and impossible to ignore. Gerald called me into his office looking annoyed that I'd gone through official channels instead of trusting his vague promises. "You're making this more complicated than it needs to be," he said. "HR has processes and paperwork and committees. I told you I was handling it. It's been 3 years. Nothing has changed. These things take time. How much time? What's the actual timeline? What are the specific criteria I need to meet?" He didn't have answers because there weren't any. The criteria was whatever he decided it was on any given day. The timeline was never. The process was designed to make me give up asking. I stopped pushing. But I also started interviewing elsewhere, quietly, testing my market value. Every conversation confirmed what I already knew. My skills were worth significantly more than Kellerman was paying. I had options. I just hadn't exercised them yet. Fourth year, everything accelerated toward the collision point. Gerald announced in early January that he was restructuring the technology oversight function, bringing in a new operations manager to handle the technology side of things and provide strategic leadership for digital initiatives. Someone with fresh perspective and executive presence. Her name was Patricia Vance, 30 years old, MBA from a respectable program. Zero technical background whatsoever. She'd previously worked in retail management, and before that spent 2 years as an assistant at her father's real estate company. Oh, and her father was David Vance, one of Kellerman's founding partners, the guy who still had his name on the original charter documents, the guy who'd stepped back from daily operations a decade ago, but still sat on the board and still had opinions about how things should run. Patricia was introduced at a company-wide meeting in February. Gerald stood at the front of the conference room beaming like he'd just announced a cure for cancer, called her a dynamic leader with innovative perspectives and natural executive presence, said she'd be overseeing all technology operations, including my security function and reporting directly to him. My department, meaning me. I was still the only person in it after 4 years. No budget for additional headcount, according to Gerald, though apparently there was budget for a 6-figure salary for the founder's daughter to manage someone she couldn't possibly understand. Patricia's first week, she scheduled what she called an orientation meeting with me. I walked in expecting a conversation about actual technical infrastructure. Maybe she wanted to understand what systems existed, what vulnerabilities we'd addressed, what my priorities were. Reasonable stuff for someone taking over technology oversight. Instead, she spent 45 minutes talking about synergy and cross-functional optimization and leveraging core competencies for enhanced stakeholder value delivery. Business school buzzwords strung together like Christmas lights. When I tried to explain the actual technical infrastructure I managed, she held up her hand and smiled. "I don't need the weeds," she said. "That's your job. I'm here to provide strategic direction and stakeholder management. You keep the engines running and let me worry about where we're driving." Strategic direction meaning she wanted to make decisions without understanding what those decisions affected. Stakeholder management meaning she wanted to take credit for successes and blame me for failures. Keep the engines running, meaning do all the actual work, while she collected the salary and the title, and the corner office with the window. Same pattern Gerald had established, just with a younger face and better hair. Over the next 3 months, Patricia implemented changes that made zero technical sense, but looked impressive in PowerPoint presentations. She wanted weekly status reports formatted in a specific template she'd learned in her MBA program. Color-coded section, executive summaries, strategic implications analysis. None of it improved actual security. All of it created more busy work. She wanted the security documentation rewritten to be more accessible to non-technical stakeholders, which meant dumbing down critical technical specifications until they were basically useless for actual implementation. She wanted the threat monitoring dashboard redesigned with better graphics and more visually appealing color schemes. Functionality didn't matter. Aesthetics did. One time she suggested we should explore blockchain integration for our security protocols because she'd read an article about it in a business magazine. I spent 30 minutes explaining why that made no sense for our specific use case. She nodded and said she'd think about it strategically. The next week she mentioned the blockchain idea in an executive meeting as something she was exploring. Left out the part where I told her it was pointless. Meanwhile, I kept the actual systems running, fixed problems before they became disasters, maintained the encryption infrastructure through 2 key rotation issues that could have caused serious problems if I hadn't been monitoring constantly, handled the real work that kept 12,000 clients' sensitive data safe, while Patricia presented slides about digital transformation and innovation mindset. Then came the Thursday in April that changed everything. I'd been tracking job openings for months by this point, had conversations with 3 different companies that seemed promising. One was a direct competitor with a legitimate security architect role that paid almost triple my current salary. I had options, real ones, but I wanted to make one final attempt to get what I deserved at Kellerman before walking away from 4 years of invested work and built relationships. I scheduled a meeting with Gerald directly. Went over Patricia's head because I knew she'd just redirect me into process and procedure designed to make me give up. I came prepared with documentation that would have made any HR professional weep with its thoroughness. Market salary data from 3 different compensation surveys. A comprehensive list of every project I'd completed over 4 years with estimated value delivered. The security audit results that had impressed federal regulators. Industry certifications I'd earned on my own time. Speaking invitations I'd received from professional organizations. 4 years of contribution, summarized in a 12-page report with appendices. Gerald kept glancing at his watch during my presentation. 5 minutes in, he interrupted. "I appreciate your dedication," he said. Same words he'd used 3 years ago. "But I think there's some fundamental confusion about your role here and what you're actually asking for." My role? You're a coder. An important one, sure. Technical people are valuable, but titles are for leaders. You're not managing a team. You're not setting strategic direction. You're not presenting to the board or interfacing with clients. You're maintaining systems. That's valuable work, but it's not leadership work. I built those systems from scratch. The encryption infrastructure alone took 8 months of 12-hour days. Gerald waved his hand dismissively. Building and leading are different skill sets. Patricia leads the technology strategy. You implement it. That's the structure we've established, and it's working well. Working well? Patricia doesn't understand the first thing about what I actually do. Last week, she asked me why we couldn't just use Google to secure our client data. She's learning, growing into the role. That's normal for any new leader. So, Patricia gets a leadership title and a 6-figure salary for asking questions and attending meetings, while I get called a coder for building the infrastructure that keeps this company compliant with federal security regulations. Gerald's expression hardened. The friendly mentor mask slipped, and I saw something colder underneath. I don't appreciate your tone, he said. Patricia has executive confidence for a reason. If you can't work productively within the structure we've established, then maybe this isn't the right environment for your career anymore. Something clicked in that moment. Not anger exactly, more like clarity. Crystal clear suddenly. I'd spent 4 years waiting for people to recognize my value, hoping that if I just worked harder and delivered more and documented better, they'd eventually see what I contributed. They'd finally connect the dots between the secure systems and the person who built them. They'd understand that the compliance wins and the regulatory approvals and the client confidence all traced back to work I did alone in the server room at midnight. They never would. They'd structured their entire worldview around the idea that people like me were interchangeable parts. Replaceable units. Just coders. The fact that I'd single-handedly prevented multiple potential disasters and built competitive advantage they took for granted didn't register because it happened invisibly. The fact that Patricia couldn't do any of it didn't matter because she had the right last name and the right presentation skills. I stood up from my chair. You're right, I said. This isn't the right environment for me. I quit. Gerald actually laughed, like I'd made a joke. You can't be serious. I'm completely serious. Effective immediately. His face changed fast. The condescending amusement disappeared, and something like concern flickered through. You can't just quit. There's transition work. Knowledge transfer. We need 2 weeks' notice minimum. The security systems require... Check my employment contract, I said. I'm at will. No notice period required either direction. You could fire me today without cause. I can quit today without cause. That's how at-will employment works. But the systems need maintenance. The encryption protocols need monitoring. You can't just walk away from... I'll write up a summary of current system status before I leave today. Basic information about where things stand. Beyond that, you'll need to figure it out yourselves. That's what leadership is for, right? I walked out before he could respond. Went straight to my desk. Spent the next 2 hours writing the most minimal handover document I could justify as professional. Current system status. Login credentials for administrator accounts, which I knew they'd disable immediately anyway. Location of documentation folders on the shared drive. Basic information that told them where to find things without explaining how any of it actually worked. The detailed encryption system documentation. The mathematical foundations of the key rotation algorithm. The maintenance procedures required to keep everything functioning. That was stored in a secure repository that only I had access to. When I logged out of my account for the last time, that access went with me. I wasn't sabotaging anything. I wasn't deleting files or planting malware or doing anything unethical. I was simply leaving a job that didn't value my contribution and taking my expertise with me. That expertise was mine. I'd developed it through years of study and practice and implementation. It belonged to me, not to a company that paid me entry-level wages for senior-level work. Patricia appeared at my desk around 4 p.m., looking confused and slightly panicked. Gerald said, "You resigned?" "That's correct. But we have the quarterly security review next week. You were supposed to present our compliance status to the regulatory auditors. I'm sure you can handle it. You're the technology leader after all. Strategic direction, stakeholder management, all that stuff." She stared at me like I'd started speaking a language she didn't recognize, which I guess in a way I had. I gathered my personal items from the desk. One coffee mug that said, "Have you tried turning it off and on again?" A few technical books I'd brought from home. A photo of my dog Max. 4 years of my professional life fit into a cardboard box small enough to carry with one hand. Walked out of that building at 4:47 p.m. on a Thursday afternoon in April. Didn't look back. Didn't say goodbye to anyone except Janet in accounting, who I'd always gotten along with. She looked sad but not surprised. Drove home in silence. Ordered pizza. Sat on my couch with Max curled up next to me and felt absolutely nothing. No regret. No second guessing. No panic about what I'd just done. just the calm certainty that I'd finally made the right call. Friday morning, I woke up to 17 missed calls and 43 text messages, all from Gerald, Patricia, random coworkers I barely talked to. Even the company's HR director Sharon had tried reaching me twice. I ignored all of them. The voicemails were a progression of emotion. Started with Gerald sounding annoyed that I'd left without proper transition documentation. Then confused about some system alerts nobody understood. Then concerned about error messages appearing on Patricia's dashboard. Then genuinely worried about warnings related to the encryption subsystem. I made breakfast, scrambled eggs and toast, took Max for a long walk around the neighborhood, went to the gym, let my phone blow up without looking at it. By Friday afternoon, the emails started coming. Formal requests from HR for information about the security infrastructure. Technical questions about specific error codes Patricia had forwarded without understanding. Demands that I respond immediately due to the urgent and time-sensitive nature of the situation. I didn't respond. Friday evening, my girlfriend Rachel came over for dinner. I told her the whole story. The 4 years of being underpaid. The title change requests that went nowhere. Gerald's comments about titles being for leaders. The decision to walk away. She listened carefully. Rachel worked in hospital administration. She understood workplace politics and organizational dysfunction. So what happens now? She asked. Now I find a job that actually values what I bring to the table. Already have some leads. And Kellerman? I shrugged. They figure it out or they don't. Not my problem anymore. She nodded slowly. You seem really calm about this. I am calm. First time in 4 years I don't feel like I'm waiting for permission to be recognized. I'm done asking. I'm done hoping. I'm just done. Saturday morning, 48 hours since I'd quit. My phone rang at 6:47 a.m., Gerald's personal cell number. I let it go to voicemail. The message was pure panic. His voice cracked halfway through. The entire database is locked, he said. Nobody can access anything. Client records, financial data, account information, everything. The encryption system is showing some kind of key expiration error, and nothing we've tried has worked. We need you back here immediately. Name your price, whatever you want. Whatever title, whatever salary, just please call me back. I smiled, made coffee, took my time. What Gerald didn't understand was that the encryption system I'd built operated on a 48-hour key rotation cycle. Every 2 days, the system automatically generated new encryption keys and deprecated the old ones. The algorithm that generated those new keys was based on mathematical principles I'd developed specifically for their infrastructure. Without understanding those principles, you couldn't generate valid keys. Without valid keys, you couldn't decrypt the data. Without decrypting the data, you couldn't access anything. The system worked exactly as designed. It just happened to be designed by someone they dismissed as replaceable, just a coder. I waited until 10 a.m. to call Gerald back. Let him stew in the panic for a few more hours. He answered on the first ring, voice ragged and desperate like he hadn't slept. Thank God, he said. We need you back here right now. The entire database is completely inaccessible. Nothing works. Patricia's been trying to reach the original software vendor, but they said our encryption system is custom, and they have no documentation for it. Because I built it from scratch. Remember? Long silence on his end. I remember you telling me I was just a coder, I said calmly. That titles are for leaders. That maintaining systems isn't real leadership work. I didn't mean... Look, we can discuss semantics later. Right now, I need you to come in and fix this before it becomes a regulatory disaster. What exactly are you offering? He didn't even hesitate. Triple your salary. Senior security architect title. Whatever title you want actually. Full benefits package with enhanced retirement matching. Corner office. Whatever you need. Just name it. I let that sit for a moment. Savored it, if I'm being honest. 4 years of being underpaid and undervalued and dismissed as interchangeable, and suddenly my worth was crystal clear. Not because they'd gained new respect for my abilities or recognized the value I'd provided all along. Because they were desperate. No, I said. No? What do you mean no? I mean I'm declining your offer. I don't work there anymore. I have no interest in working there again. But you have to help us. We have client obligations, regulatory requirements. If this data stays locked, we could face federal investigation. We could lose our operating license. Sounds like a leadership problem. Maybe Patricia can provide some strategic direction. This isn't funny. Gerald's voice rose. People could lose their jobs over this. The company could go under. 12,000 clients could have their financial information trapped in a system nobody can access. You should have thought about that before you told me my work didn't matter. I hung up. The rest of Saturday was peaceful. Took Max to the dog park. Cooked dinner. Watched a documentary about deep-sea exploration. Went to bed early and slept better than I had in years. Sunday morning, Gerald showed up at my apartment building. Somehow got through the lobby security by telling them He was my uncle visiting from out of town. I watched him through the peephole for a solid 2 minutes before deciding to open the door. He looked like he'd aged 10 years in 2 days. Suit wrinkled and stained. Tie missing entirely. Dark circles under his eyes. Hair disheveled. "Can we talk?" he asked. His voice was hoarse. "We're talking right now. Please. I'm begging you. Whatever happened between us, whatever I said, I apologize. I apologize completely. The company needs you. I need you." The company had 4 years to show me it valued my contribution. It chose not to. You chose not to. We made mistakes. I made mistakes. I admit that freely. But punishing 12,000 clients because of management failures isn't fair to them. "I'm not punishing anyone," I said. "I quit a job where I was underpaid and disrespected. What happens after my departure isn't my responsibility. I didn't break anything. I didn't sabotage anything. I simply stopped maintaining systems that required my expertise to function." Gerald's jaw tightened. "We could pursue legal action. You clearly designed this system to fail intentionally if you ever left. I designed the system to be maximally secure for your clients' sensitive data. That security includes sophisticated encryption that requires ongoing maintenance from qualified personnel. You chose not to develop that qualified personnel. You chose to underpay and dismiss the one person who understood the system. That's on you. But you're welcome to have your lawyers review my work. Everything I did was documented, authorized, and within the scope of my employment. I didn't plant any traps. I didn't create any backdoors. I simply left." He stood there in my doorway for a long moment. The desperation in his eyes shifted to something calculating, trying to find another angle, another leverage point. "What would it take?" he asked finally. "Not to come back permanently, not even to work for us again. Just to fix this one issue. Restore access, get the systems functioning. Consultant basis. Whatever hourly rate you want." I thought about it carefully, not because I was tempted, but because I wanted to make sure my answer was absolutely clear and unambiguous. "Nothing," I said. "There's nothing you could offer that would make me help you. Not money, not titles, not apologies, not because I want revenge or want to watch you suffer, because I don't want any relationship whatsoever with a company that only values people when it's desperate. You had 4 years to treat me fairly. You chose not to. That choice has consequences. I don't owe you anything. I don't owe Kellerman anything, and I'm certainly not going to rescue you from a situation your own decisions created." I closed the door. He stood there for another minute. I heard him walk away eventually. Monday morning, I had 3 interviews scheduled with companies I'd been cultivating relationships with for months. Good companies with competitive compensation and cultures that actually seem to value technical expertise. I spent the day having real conversations with people who understood what I brought to the table. People who asked intelligent questions about my experience and seemed genuinely interested in the answers. Meanwhile, Kellerman and Associates was in full crisis mode. I heard about it later from Janet, who'd stayed in touch through text messages. Patricia had tried to hire emergency consultants to crack the encryption. 4 different security firms looked at the system and said it would take weeks to reverse engineer, assuming it was even possible. The mathematical foundations were too specialized, too custom. Gerald tried reaching out to professors at my alma mater, thinking they might be able to help with the algorithm. Dead end. The mathematics were my original work, not something I'd learned in any class. The board held an emergency meeting Monday night, discussed options ranging from paying any amount I demanded to pursuing legal action for what they called intentional sabotage. Their outside counsel advised strongly against the legal route. I hadn't broken any laws. I hadn't violated any contracts. Everything I'd done was completely legitimate. Building sophisticated secure systems and then leaving when mistreated wasn't a crime. It was just good sense. Tuesday morning, the company's largest client called to ask why they couldn't access their quarterly statements. Then 3 more clients called with similar questions. Then the regulatory compliance officer started asking pointed questions about data accessibility requirements and whether Kellerman was meeting its legal obligations to clients. By Tuesday afternoon, Kellerman had hired an outside security firm on an emergency basis to attempt a complete system reconstruction. Estimated timeline, 6 to 8 weeks, assuming they could eventually figure out my encryption methodology. Estimated cost, somewhere north of $500,000, including the consultants, the infrastructure rebuild, and the client communication team they'd need to manage the fallout. The irony was painful. They could have given me a $25,000 raise and a title change that cost them literally nothing. Instead, they were spending 20 times that to fix a problem that wouldn't have existed if they'd treated me with basic professional respect. Wednesday, I accepted a job offer from Meridian Financial Services, senior security architect position. Salary almost triple what Kellerman had been paying me. Signing bonus that would cover 6 months of my rent. Stock option. Comprehensive benefits. Actual respect from people who understood what my skills were worth. The hiring manager there had apparently seen my work mentioned in security industry publications from the compliance audits. She said the encryption framework I'd developed had gotten attention in professional circles, not because I'd promoted it myself, but because auditors and regulators had referenced it as an example of best practices. She said they'd been trying to figure out how to recruit me for months, but couldn't find current contact information since I wasn't on LinkedIn. Thursday evening, I got one final call from Gerald. His voice was calmer this time. Resigned almost. Defeated. The board is considering bankruptcy, he said flatly. If we can't restore client access by the end of next week, we'll face regulatory action that could force us to shut down entirely. We're also facing potential class action from clients who can't access their own financial records. I'm sorry to hear that. Are you really? His voice carried an edge of bitter accusation. You designed this system knowing exactly what would happen when you left. I designed this system to protect your clients' sensitive data from security breaches. The fact that it also requires qualified personnel to maintain is standard for any sophisticated technical infrastructure. That you didn't develop qualified personnel isn't my fault. That you didn't value the one person who understood it isn't my fault either. Unintended consequence. Right. His voice dripped skepticism. You could have prevented all of this, I said. 4 years of me asking for fair compensation and basic professional recognition. 4 years of you telling me to wait and be patient while you hired project managers at higher salaries to do nothing useful. 4 years of dismissing me as just a coder. You created this situation, Gerald. I just stopped preventing the natural consequences of your own decisions. He didn't respond for a long moment. I could hear him breathing on the other end. Patricia resigned this morning, he said finally. Told the board she never had the technical background to oversee security infrastructure and shouldn't have been put in that position. Said her father pressured her into taking the role. Sounds like she figured out something you still haven't. What's that? That leadership means taking responsibility for failures, not just claiming credit for successes. I hung up. 2 weeks later, Kellerman and Associates filed for Chapter 11 bankruptcy protection. The security firm they'd hired managed to eventually recover most of the client data after 8 weeks of intensive work, but not before federal regulators launched formal investigations into data accessibility violations. 3 separate class action lawsuits got filed by clients who couldn't access their own financial records during tax season. The lead attorney on one of those suits called it the most preventable corporate collapse he'd ever seen. Janet kept me updated through text messages. The week after the bankruptcy filing, she sent me a photo of Gerald's empty office. Cleared out overnight. No goodbye email. No farewell meeting. Just gone. The board had asked for his resignation and he'd given it within the hour. She said he'd been escorted out by security while carrying a single box. Same size box I'd carried out 6 weeks earlier. Funny how that worked. Patricia lasted 3 more days before she resigned too. Janet said she'd been crying in her office when the news broke that clients were filing lawsuits. Her father, David Vance, stepped down from the board the same week. Conflict of interest concerns now that the lawyers were circling. The Vance family name got dragged through every financial news outlet in the region for the next month. The dominoes kept falling. The head of HR got terminated after the board discovered she'd buried 4 years of my written compensation requests without forwarding them to the executive committee like Gerald had claimed. Turned out he'd been telling her to file them away and forget about them. Paper trail worked both ways. She tried to claim she was just following orders. The board didn't care. Cleaned house completely. 2 of the project managers I'd mentioned earlier, the ones making more than me to organize meetings, both got laid off in the restructuring. Turns out when you're cutting staff, you start with the people who don't actually produce anything. Strategic Implementation Coordinator doesn't sound as impressive when the company can't access its own client database. Meanwhile, I started at Meridian Financial Services, corner office with actual windows. Team of 4 people reporting to me. First week there, I sat in on a planning meeting where the CEO asked the technical staff for input before making infrastructure decisions. I almost fell out of my chair. She wanted to understand the technical implications before committing resources. Novel concept. First month, I redesigned their encryption protocols. Built something even more elegant than what I'd created at Kellerman. Documented everything properly. Cross-trained the whole team, so no single person was critical. My new boss reviewed my work and sent me a message saying it was the most thorough security architecture she'd ever approved. Asked if I'd be willing to present it to the board. I said yes. That presentation led to a budget increase for my department. New equipment. 2 additional hires. Resources I'd been begging Gerald for at Kellerman that he'd always said weren't in the budget. 3 months in, I got a LinkedIn message from someone at the restructured Kellerman. New IT director they'd hired to rebuild from scratch. Said he'd heard I was the best in the region. Wanted to pick my brain about security architecture. Offered to pay consulting rates. I didn't respond. Week later, he messaged again, said they were really struggling. The recovery firm had gotten the data back, but nobody understood how to build proper security infrastructure going forward. They were essentially starting from zero, with a fraction of their former client base and a damaged reputation. I still didn't respond. 6 months after starting at Meridian, I got invited to speak at an industry conference about encryption architecture for financial services. Standing room only, lots of questions afterward. My boss flew in from the main office just to watch the presentation. Said she wanted to see what all the buzz was about. One guy hung back until the crowd cleared, introduced himself as a consultant who'd worked on the Kellerman recovery project. Older guy, gray beard. Looked tired in that way people look when they've spent 2 months trying to crack someone else's code. That was your system, he said. I nodded. Took my team 3 weeks just to understand the mathematical foundations. Most elegant architecture I've ever seen. He pulled out his phone and showed me a screenshot. Salary data from the bankruptcy filings. Public record now. Your compensation was listed in the asset documentation. They paid you that? He asked. For building something like this? Yep. He laughed and shook his head. My junior associates make more than that. No wonder you walked. Honestly surprised you stayed as long as you did. We shook hands and he left. My boss was waiting by the exit. She'd heard the whole conversation. That true? She asked. About the salary? Every word. She shook her head. Their loss. Our gain. Janet texted me that same week with the final update on Gerald. He'd been trying to get hired at other wealth management firms in the city for months. Word had gotten around about what happened. About how he'd driven out the one person who understood the critical systems. About the things he'd said in that final meeting. 3 different firms had interviewed him and passed. One hiring manager apparently told him directly that his reputation preceded him. Last she heard, he was doing freelance consulting from his home office. Posted something on LinkedIn about being an independent advisor, helping companies with operational excellence. The comments section was brutal. Someone had linked an article about the Kellerman collapse. Career over at 57. I saved that text message. Not because I needed it. Just felt right to have it documented. Last month, Meridian promoted me to Chief Security Officer, board-level position, salary that would have made Gerald choke on his expensive coffee. The CEO called me into her office personally to deliver the news. Shook my hand and said they were lucky to have me, that the board had voted unanimously. I signed the new contract that afternoon, walked out to my team and told them about the promotion. They actually cheered. First time in my career that coworkers seemed genuinely happy about my success instead of threatened by it. That evening, I came home and found a letter in my mailbox. No return address. Plain white envelope. I opened it at the kitchen counter while Max waited for his dinner. Handwritten note from Gerald. 2 sentences. I should have listened. I'm sorry. I read it once. Then I walked over to the shredder and fed it through. If you enjoyed this video, please hit that subscribe button. It really helps the channel and help us bring you more and better stories. Thanks.